No school taught you these skills. No book named them clearly. Yet the richest people you personally know have all 7 of them. They never explained why. You never asked. Machiavelli named them centuries ago, then let them fade into silence. Not this time. Watch closely now. This is exactly the part nobody ever bothers to explain. Machiavelli wrote at considerable length about the visible tools of power, armies, alliances, treasure, but he spent just as much of his attention on something far quieter, the specific, learnable habits of perception and timing that separated a prince who merely held power from one who actually multiplied it steadily over time. Those quieter skills rarely get written down as clearly as the visible tools do, which is exactly why most people never actually learn them on purpose. They absorb them, if they absorb them at all, entirely by accident, watching someone else use them silently for years before finally, belatedly, noticing the underlying pattern. This is not a list of fixed personality traits a person either has or simply doesn't. Every single skill here is genuinely learnable, deliberately and on purpose, the exact same way any other practical skill is learnable, through sustained repetition and close attention rather than any accident of birth or luck. 7 unspoken skills, named plainly for once instead of left to be guessed at. Notice, too, why these particular 7 skills tend to travel together in the same people rather than appearing in isolation. Each one is, at its core, a variation on the same underlying discipline, paying closer attention to what is actually happening in a given moment than to what a person expected or hoped would be happening instead. Reading a room carefully, asking a genuinely sharp question, noticing a specific detail worth remembering later, recognizing the right moment to walk away, catching real information inside idle conversation, staying clear-headed inside shared panic, and pushing steadily through an unglamorous stretch nobody else is even watching. All of these draw on that same underlying habit of attention, simply applied across 7 quite different situations. Learning one genuinely well tends to make the next one considerably easier to learn, since the core discipline being practiced is fundamentally the very same one each time, only wearing a slightly different costume depending on the particular room it happens to be worn in. Skill 1. Reading a room before you speak in it. Most people walk into a room and immediately start executing whatever plan they arrived with, regardless of the room's actual mood, hierarchy, or unspoken tension. The wealthy instinctively read the room first, silently, before committing to a single word, adjusting the plan itself based on what the room is actually signaling rather than what they expected to find. 2 separate negotiators enter an identical meeting carrying an identical proposal. One launches directly into the prepared pitch, missing the visible tension already sitting between 2 people on the other side of the table. The other spends the first several minutes simply observing, adjusting the pitch's tone and order based on what that tension reveals before saying a single substantive word. The first negotiator's pitch, technically identical in content, lands badly against a mood he never noticed. The second negotiator's pitch, delivered with the same content but better timing, lands cleanly because it was never fighting against a room it failed to read. This skill requires actively resisting the urge to fill silence immediately upon entering a room, an urge that feels, to most people, like wasted, unproductive time slipping by. It is not wasted at all. It is, in fact, the only genuinely reliable way to know what is actually happening in that room before acting as though you already fully do. Practice this deliberately by simply pausing, silently, for a full 10 seconds upon entering any room that matters, before saying anything at all. That short pause feels awkward at first and becomes, with repetition, the exact habit that separates a read room from a room walked into blind. Consider what actually gets missed by the person who skips this pause entirely. A room's mood is rarely announced directly. It shows instead in posture, in who is sitting closest to whom, in the specific silence that follows a comment nobody chose to address out loud. None of this requires unusual perceptiveness to notice. It only requires actually looking for it before speaking, which is precisely the step most people skip in their rush to begin executing whatever they walked in planning to say. There is a second, compounding benefit to this habit worth naming. A person known for reading a room accurately earns, over time, a specific kind of trust that a merely articulate person never quite earns in the same way. Colleagues and counterparts learn they can rely on this person's read of a tense situation, which quietly elevates their influence in exactly the moments influence matters most, long before any formal authority catches up to reflect it. A third pattern worth naming: this skill degrades quickly under stress, precisely when it matters most. A person capable of reading a calm room accurately often loses that same ability the moment real pressure enters, reverting instead to whatever plan they walked in with, regardless of what the room is now actually signaling. The people who keep this skill intact under pressure are usually the ones who have specifically practiced it under mild pressure many times before, building a habit sturdy enough to survive the moment it is needed most, rather than one that only ever worked in comfortable, low-stakes conditions. Skill 2. Asking better questions than everyone else in the room. Most people in a room full of experts try to prove their own value by having the best answers. The genuinely valuable person in the room is frequently the one asking the sharpest questions instead, the one that reframes the entire discussion and reveals what everyone else had been quietly avoiding. Two separate advisors sit in on the same strategic meeting. One spends the meeting offering confident answers to questions already being discussed, adding volume without adding much new. The other asks a single, sharply targeted question nobody else had thought to raise, one that reframes the entire remaining conversation around a risk everybody had been quietly ignoring. The first advisor is remembered as competent. The second advisor is remembered as the one who actually changed the outcome, simply by asking rather than answering. This requires genuine restraint in a room that rewards visible confidence, since asking a real question, rather than performing an answer, briefly signals uncertainty before it reveals genuine insight. The people skilled at this have simply decided that brief discomfort is worth the far larger payoff of actually reframing the conversation correctly. Consider the specific difference between a question asked to appear engaged and a question asked because a genuine gap in the group's thinking has actually been noticed. The first kind is easy to spot and rarely changes anything, since it is designed to be heard rather than answered. The second kind requires actually following the conversation closely enough to notice what nobody has said yet, which is considerably harder than it sounds, and precisely why so few people in any given room are actually doing it. There is a second layer worth naming. A sharp question, asked at the right moment, often does more to establish someone standing in a room than an entire hour of confident answers ever could. Answers, however correct, tend to blend into the general flow of a meeting. A single question that reframes the discussion is remembered specifically, often quoted back later as the moment the real conversation actually began. A third pattern worth naming: the quality of a question tends to track the quality of listening that preceded it far more closely than it tracks raw intelligence. A brilliant person only half listening to a meeting will ask a far weaker question than an ordinarily sharp person who has been tracking the conversation closely from the very first minute. The habit worth building, then, is not primarily about becoming cleverer. It is about staying genuinely engaged with what is actually being said long enough to notice the specific gap worth asking about. Skill 3. Making people feel important without flattering them. Flattery is cheap, immediately recognizable, and quietly resented even by the people who accept it. Genuinely making someone feel important, by actually listening, remembering specific details, and taking their concerns seriously, is a completely different skill, far more rare and far more valuable to the person receiving it. Two separate hosts each greet the very same important guest at the very same event. One offers a stream of generic compliments, technically pleasant but forgotten within the hour. The other asks one specific, well-informed question about something the guest genuinely cares about and listens closely to the entire answer. The first host is quickly forgotten among a dozen similar greetings the guest received that evening. The second host is remembered specifically and remembered warmly the next time an opportunity involving that guest happens to arise. This skill cannot be faked convincingly for long, since genuine attention and performed attention read differently to almost anyone who has experienced both. The actual work here is simply caring enough in the moment to remember the specific detail rather than already planning what to say next. Consider why generic flattery fails so reliably despite remaining so common. A compliment that could be said to anyone signals almost immediately that it was not actually built for the specific person receiving it, and people notice this gap even when they cannot articulate exactly why the compliment felt hollow. A specific, well-informed question, by contrast, cannot be delivered without genuine prior attention, which is precisely what makes it register as real rather than performed. There is a second, quieter mechanism worth naming. Remembering a specific detail about someone and raising it, unprompted, weeks or months later, signals something flattery never can, namely that the person was genuinely thought about even while absent. This single habit, practiced consistently over years, builds a specific kind of reputation. The reputation of someone who actually pays attention, which compounds into trust and opportunity in ways that are difficult to trace back to any single moment. A third point worth making directly: this skill scales poorly with distraction, which is precisely why it has become rarer rather than more common in recent years. A person half attending to a conversation while genuinely occupied elsewhere cannot produce the specific, well-informed question this skill actually requires, no matter how much they might want to. The people who remain genuinely good at this have usually made a deliberate choice to set aside competing attention entirely during the conversations that matter, treating that undivided attention as the actual cost of practicing the skill rather than an optional nicety. Skill 4. Knowing exactly when to walk away from the table. Most people treat any negotiation still technically in progress as one still worth continuing, unable to recognize the specific moment it has stopped being productive. The wealthy recognize that moment early and leave calmly, understanding that walking away is frequently the single most persuasive move remaining, precisely because it is the one move that costs the other side something real. Two entirely separate buyers each negotiate for the very same property against a seller unwilling to move on price. One keeps negotiating indefinitely, slowly conceding ground out of simple persistence. The other states a final, fair number and calmly stands to leave when the seller doesn't immediately accept it. The first buyer eventually gets the property at a worse price than he originally wanted. The second buyer, walking toward the door, is frequently called back by a seller suddenly reconsidering and closes at the number he actually wanted in the first place. The willingness to actually walk, not merely threaten to, is what makes this skill work at all. A bluffed exit is usually detected instantly by anyone experienced, while a genuinely calm, real willingness to lose the deal is the one thing that cannot be faked convincingly. Consider what actually has to be true internally for a walkaway to read as genuine rather than performed. The person has to have already, privately, made peace with losing the deal entirely before ever standing up from the table, since any lingering visible anxiety about the outcome undermines the exact signal the walk is meant to send. This internal work happens before the negotiation even begins, in the form of deciding a real, honest walkaway number in advance, rather than discovering it improvised in the middle of the tension. There is a second pattern worth naming. The specific moment right after standing to leave is frequently the most informative moment in the entire negotiation, since it reveals, almost immediately, whether the other side's stated position was actually final or merely an opening one. People skilled at this treat that moment as valuable information regardless of how it resolves, rather than as a nerve-wracking test to be endured and quickly escaped. A third point worth making: this skill is often mistaken for coldness by people who have not practiced it, when in fact it usually requires more self-awareness than simply continuing to negotiate indefinitely does. Knowing one's own real walkaway number, honestly, requires having already done the harder internal work of separating genuine value from simple attachment to closing any deal at all, a distinction most people never actually sit down to work out in advance. Skill 5. Turning small talk into real information. Most people treat small talk as empty time to be endured before the actual conversation begins. The wealthy treat it as the actual conversation, extracting genuine, useful information from casual exchange that a more formal question would never successfully surface. Two entirely separate people attend the very same casual gathering with the very same person of interest present. One treats the small talk as filler, waiting impatiently for a more serious moment to arrive. The other listens closely to the small talk itself, noticing a small, offhand comment about a genuine frustration the person is currently dealing with. The first person leaves the gathering having learned nothing usable. The second person leaves having learned exactly what problem, if solved, would make him genuinely valuable to that same person going forward. This requires treating every casual exchange as genuinely worth attention rather than an obligation to survive politely. The information offered freely in small talk is frequently more honest than anything the same person would say in a formal, guarded setting. Consider why small talk specifically produces more honest information than a formal question aimed at the same subject. A direct question about a genuine frustration invites a guarded, considered answer, since the person being asked knows exactly what is being asked and why. The same information, offered unprompted during idle conversation, arrives without that guard raised, since nobody consciously edits an offhand comment about their week the way they edit a direct answer to a pointed question. There is a second, practical benefit worth naming. The person who listens well during small talk accumulates a genuinely useful map of what matters to the people around them, built slowly over many small, low-stakes conversations rather than a handful of high-stakes ones. That accumulated map becomes an asset in its own right, one that pays off unpredictably at moments that could never have been planned for in advance, simply because the right piece of casually offered information happened to already be on hand. A third point worth making. This skill is easy to mistake for simple friendliness from the outside, which is part of why it stays so unspoken despite being genuinely learnable. The person practicing it well is not merely being sociable for its own sake. They are quietly, deliberately treating every casual exchange as a small opportunity to actually understand another person's situation, a subtle but real difference in intent that separates a genuinely useful habit from ordinary small talk that happens to sound identical from across the room to anyone not paying close attention to the actual purpose behind it. Skill 6. Staying calm when everyone else panics. Panic spreads faster than almost any other emotion in a room, and most people absorb it automatically the moment enough people around them start visibly panicking. The wealthy train themselves to notice the spreading panic without absorbing it, which alone puts them in a small minority, still capable of clear thinking exactly when clear thinking is worth the most. Two entirely separate investors each watch the very same sudden market decline unfold in real time. One absorbs the visible panic around him and sells quickly, joining the crowd already rushing for the exit. The other notices the same panic without being pulled into it, using the resulting clearer head to actually evaluate whether the underlying situation justifies the crowd's reaction. The first investor locks in a loss driven by emotion he never chose to feel. The second investor, still thinking clearly, frequently finds the exact moment everyone else's panic created the best opportunity of the entire year. This does not mean ignoring genuine bad news, which sometimes genuinely justifies concern. It means separating the actual severity of the situation from the amplified severity of the room's shared emotional reaction to it, which are frequently two very different sizes of problem. Consider the specific mechanism by which panic spreads faster than the information that originally caused it. A single person reacting visibly triggers a nearby person to react too, not because that second person independently evaluated the situation, but because visible alarm is, evolutionarily, treated as useful information worth copying quickly rather than questioning. This mechanism operates well below conscious thought, which is precisely why staying calm requires active, deliberate effort rather than simply being a passive personality trait some people happen to have. There is a second layer worth naming here. The specific value of staying calm is not merely personal, it becomes a visible signal to everyone else in the room too. A single person who visibly stays composed during a shared panic often becomes, without asking for the role, the person others quietly look toward for a read on how bad the situation actually is, an influence that arrives entirely because of composure rather than any formal authority to grant it. A third point worth making: staying calm during genuine panic is considerably easier to sustain when it has been practiced deliberately during smaller, lower-stakes moments of stress first. A person attempting this skill for the first time during a genuine crisis is starting from zero exactly when the stakes are highest, while a person who has rehearsed staying composed through smaller frustrations arrives at the real test with an already practiced habit rather than one being improvised under pressure for the very first time. Skill 7. Finishing the boring part nobody else will. Most projects fail not at the exciting beginning, but somewhere in the tedious, unglamorous middle. The part with no applause and no visible progress, where most people quietly lose momentum and move on to something newer and more exciting instead. The wealthy have simply trained themselves to keep going through that exact stretch, understanding that the boring middle is not a detour from the real work. It is the real work. Two entirely separate founders each start an equally promising venture of their very own. One works hard through the exciting launch, then loses momentum during the long, unglamorous stretch of unglamorous maintenance and small fixes that follows, quietly drifting toward a new, more exciting idea instead. The other pushes through that same unglamorous stretch, uninterested in how boring it looks from the outside, focused only on the fact that it still needs finishing. The first founder has a folder full of exciting, unfinished beginnings. The second founder has one finished thing that actually works, which turns out to be worth more than every one of the first founder's abandoned beginnings combined. There is no shortcut through the boring middle, and anyone claiming otherwise is usually selling something. The only reliable method is simply deciding, in advance, that the boring stretch is expected and normal, so it does not get mistaken for a sign that something has gone wrong when it inevitably arrives. Consider why the exciting beginning of a venture rarely predicts anything about whether it will actually finish. Excitement is cheap and widely available at the start of nearly any new idea, which is exactly why it is such a poor filter for distinguishing a venture that will actually get built from one that will quietly join a pile of abandoned beginnings. The unglamorous middle, by contrast, filters ruthlessly, since nothing about it offers the emotional reward that got the venture started in the first place. There is a second pattern worth naming. The specific skill of finishing boring work is transferable across nearly every domain a person eventually works in, unlike more specialized skills that only apply within a single field. A person who has trained themselves to push through one genuinely tedious stretch has, in the process, built a general capacity that shows up again in every future unglamorous middle they will ever encounter, which is precisely why this particular skill compounds more broadly than almost any other on this list. A third point worth naming: the boring middle rarely announces its own length in advance, which is exactly what makes it so easy to abandon prematurely. A person expecting the tedious stretch to last a fixed, known duration often quits the moment that estimate is exceeded, mistaking a longer than expected middle for a sign of genuine failure rather than simply an underestimated timeline. The people who finish reliably have usually learned to stop estimating the boring stretch's length altogether, focusing instead only on whether the underlying reason for finishing the work still genuinely holds true. 7 unspoken skills. None of them require talent you either have or don't. All 7 are simply habits, practiced deliberately by people who noticed what most people never bother to name out loud. Go back through this list honestly and identify the one skill you have genuinely never practiced on purpose, the one you have always assumed was simply a personality trait rather than something learnable. That single honest identification is worth more than the other 6 combined, because it tells you exactly where the actual gap is. Machiavelli wrote about a prince's virtue not as an inherited trait, but as a set of habits deliberately cultivated through repeated, attentive practice, the same framing that applies directly to every skill named here. None of these 7 require a personality most people don't already have access to in some form. What they actually require is choosing, deliberately and repeatedly, to practice the underlying discipline of close attention in 7 specific situations most people move through on autopilot instead. The gap between the person who has all 7 and the person who has none was never talent. It was simply years of unremarked, deliberate practice against years of never having named the skill worth practicing in the first place. A gap that, once actually named and understood, becomes considerably easier for anyone willing to start closing it on purpose. If this changed the way you see what actually separates people, then don't stop here, because what you've heard in this video is only the surface. There are deeper layers to psychology, influence, and wealth that simply can't be explored fully in one video. Not because they don't exist, but because most people aren't ready to hear them. That's why most stay average. If you're not one of them, then subscribe, because every video here is designed to sharpen your mindset, increase your value, and separate you from the crowd. No fluff, no noise, just strategy. Most people will watch this and move on. A few will stay and change. Decide which one you are.